We want to take you on a journey of innovative thinking about what we do at this momentous moment in the history of the Jamaat, our network, and our horizons after a long period of transition and struggle and soul searching. And we were talking about this moment in time, the three of us, thinking about how momentous in the history of the Jamaat and in the history of our network this gathering here this year is, after 7 long years, after the last global encounters in Lisbon, after COVID, after the passing of our dear late Highness Prince Karim Aga Khan IV, and then that acute feeling of rupture and of emptiness and doubt about the continuity that we had been used to for so many years as believers, as all of us who have committed our careers and our lives to everything that he had been building. And then we were contemplating how important this moment is in terms of the community coming together, feeling each other very much in person, reassessing their sense of community, reassessing their sense of purpose, and also reaffirming but also questioning their complex layers of identity as they gather here in this purpose-built location, the Dubai World Trade Center. So in the context of all of us, of this, the three of us were thinking, normally, what we do is we talk about our respective institutions with fact and figures, and we know what we are doing, we know what our purpose is, and what our identity is, but for many in the Jamaat at large, it may not always make sense what the bigger context is, what the bigger idea is, the bigger purpose, and how it exudes community and identity. So today we want to take what we individually do as launch pads to make you think in an innovative way about the bigger picture in so many ways. And joining me on this adventurous ride of innovative thinking are two very prominent intellectuals and participants in the work of the network over many decades. I have here to my left Shiraz Allibhai, who is the Deputy Director of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and since 2023 also the Director of the Historic Cities Program. Has been with the system since the 70s, if I remember correctly. So he was in diapers still at the time, but has committed his life and his work all to the Aga Khan Development Network, and in particular the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. And then on the right here, I have another Alibhai, Dr. Fayaz Alibhai, who is a research associate at the Institute for Ismaili Studies in London, and very much at the helm of an initiative that brings together the Institute for Ismaili Studies and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture and Jamaati institutions in trying to record, preserve, conserve Ismaili tangible heritage, and in particular, of course, also archaeological and architectural sites, but also other manifestations of the legacies of the community over centuries. So what we want to do today is to talk about 3 of the key points that we are all contemplating as we are here in Dubai this year: community, purpose, and identity. And for each of these big ticket items, we have chosen an architectural case study to start off our conversation and take us from a concrete context that we are working on to a broader conversation around the meaning of community at so many different levels at this time. So I would invite Shiraz, please, to start with our first case study for community, which is the Jenne Mosque in Mali. Over to you.
Thank you, Ulrike. So this mosque, Earth and Architecture program, started very much as a community-based program because these mosques, year after year after year, have to be replastered. And they have to be replastered by the community. As you can see in the picture behind me, this is an annual festival where people come, they take mud, they climb up. You see the wood on the mosque structure. That's not only rebar holding the mosque together, it's also a ladder to allow the community members to climb the mosque and plaster it. And it's a big, big 3-day festival. When AKTC came in to restore these mosques, we had 2 Italian gentlemen come to Jenne. And the community got very suspicious. Now, this is really why you need to build community ties. The community got very suspicious of what they were doing there. They were inspecting the mosque, they were climbing, they were looking at cracks. The community left, which got very scary, and they came back with machetes, and they chased my 2 colleagues into a hotel until we could call security services to calm down the process. This is one of the first times where we went in and did not engage directly with the community, and AKTC learned its lesson very, very quickly. In all of our projects now, community is an integral part of the planning. It's not an afterthought. So we do surveys, we begin to understand what brings community together, what binds them, and in this case, it's their spaces of prayer and worship. But it's also the care for their identity in the plastering ceremony, and it really is a ceremony. It's not just about maintaining the building, it's about coming together and doing something greater than the sum of just your individual contribution. And I think this project in particular offers lessons for us and how we approach projects afterwards, but it also offers lessons of the power of communal spaces, spaces of worship, and sacred spaces, and how those things bring community together.
And of course, throughout Muslim communities and Muslim cultures across many centuries, the mosque has always been the beating heart of the community. Wherever the community settled down, at its very heart was the mosque. And in that mosque, not only prayer took place, but learning took place, happy occasions were celebrated like festivals, and this sense of community and belonging was renewed periodically at all times. But what is also fascinating, of course, with this particular case study, and it reminds us about the power of community, is the fact that this mosque, as far as we know, originally goes back to the 13th century. So it is about 700 years old. The structure we have at the moment, I think, dates to the early 1900s. But it can only survive, given the fact that it is made of natural materials entirely, by the community coming together every single year and literally putting on their hands to add the clay, to bring the straw, and to renovate the mosque, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the only reason these buildings survive today.
Yeah.
So as you said, the community is core to their upkeep, but also to their memory, and their memory going back several hundred years.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing here is you mention memory, and that takes me over to you, Fayaz, because you will also, in your portfolio of nearly 2,000 Ismaili heritage sites, have several remainders of mosques that speak of the presence and resilience and continuity of the community, sometimes against great adversity, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think what really struck me about this particular example of community and earthen architecture was an even smaller example of sites in Ismaili histories and contexts that are not as grand a scale, but they remain important to the community. And I think your point around the fact that connection is everything, that connection makes community, and we often forget that the connection is not just among the people who are present here today in the present, but oftentimes these connections are also important for the things that have happened in the past. And so one of the things that I hope you might find when you come to the IS stand, where we have a huge selection, well, only a tenth really of a fraction of the sites we have available on our database at the moment, is one very beautiful site that I know has captured the hearts and minds of quite a few people who have visited already. And this is a tree. This is a simple tree, so it's very sort of nature-based. It's from the materials in the ground. And the reason this tree is important is because it's believed to have been planted. It's a wild pistachio tree that's been believed to have been planted by the 37th Ismaili Imam, Zulfikar Ali, also known as Shah Khalilullah I. And because this tree was planted way back, I think it was, I forget the actual date now, but it's a very old tree. And every year, in the same way, people from different communities, so not just Ismailis, you have the Ithnashris as well, come and commemorate the festival of Muharram, the martyrdom of Hussein, as a way of marking this particular time in their life. And the tree, which is believed to have been planted by Zulfikar Ali, keeps them together. And we have a couple of pictures of this wonderful tree in full bloom and in the dry season. And literally 2 days before I came here, and we had this tree on the image, one of our researchers, Mariam Rezai, said to me, "Have you seen what's happened to the tree?" And I said, "No, what's happened to the tree?" And she said, a year ago, almost exactly yesterday, I think, the communities had got together. So this is the Ismaili and the Ithnashri communities had got together because this tree had tilted so far down that it was at risk of simply collapsing and dying. And so we have a wonderful picture on the screens at the IS stand of these two communities quite literally pulling together in much the same way as these guys are plastering stuff together to make sure that this tree survives, because that's what maintains the sense of community and continuity across the ages for them. So I thought it's a nice, much smaller scale. So this stuff happens all the time.
It happens in Delhi as well, at the Dargah in Nizamuddin Basti. Something, I think Ratish mentioned, 4 million pilgrims every year. Many of those are Hindu pilgrims who come to pray there. And the community helps support that. The pilgrims get fed no matter what faith or religion you are. And it's happening in India today. So there are small pockets of this happening, and this gives us hope.
And what's, of course, completely fascinating about that is that ultimately any community is the sum of individuals. But the individual on its own, throughout history, at the highest level even, would not achieve anything at all. Because if you imagine yourselves as an individual in an entire void, nothing would ever happen. And I think this is a really, really important reminder in this day of acute isolation, where acute uber-individualism that's being encouraged in so many ways, whether it's through commercialism, whether it's through our iPhones, is actually leading to a sense of isolation that can be overcome by remembering what community can offer. And I have somebody in the audience today, I won't point him out, but we were having a conversation in Toronto, and he was not quite sure what to do as the next step in his life and seeking. And I said, listen, try to come to Dubai. Try to come and be with the community and see what unfolds. And I think he made the right decision. So anyway, but the very important point is that community is what holds us together, and it always also reminds me of the principle of Tawheed, and even how in Islamic art that is symbolized by geometry, because within Muslim philosophy, you have this notion of the circle pricking the paper before you draw a circle, and then use your ruler and your pen to start drawing all these intricate little shapes that then continue into infinity. And within this geometric pattern, every single little element depends on the whole for its harmony. But the whole also depends on the presence of that little element in the whole to make sure the equilibrium continues. So there's a lot that we can think about when we look at the projects that we are involved in and our work at large. And then, of course, when you think about community, what does a community need? It needs purpose. It needs a direction and it needs purpose. And again, you know, our title talks about continuity in this respect, but continuity is only possible if you change. Because if you believe that continuity is stasis, you will die. It's not going to work. So at this point of juncture, again, we are all here and we are feeling the continuity, but it is also the start of a new beginning with new horizons, new thinking, new being, and new ways of doing. And when we think about purpose, again, we have a beautiful historic case study for you, which encapsulates in itself the continuity piece, the resilience piece, the endurance piece, but also the purpose piece at so many, many different levels, starting with the fact that, yet again, this is a purpose-built architectural structure. Shiraz, over to you.
Well, I just want to introduce the Souk project in Aleppo. As all of you know, Syria suffered through many years of civil war. This is the largest covered souk in the world. It's 14 kilometers of alleyways and shops. Heavily damaged, sections of it very much destroyed, as you can see in the pictures above me. When we were asked to choose a project in Aleppo, we'd already been working there since 2002 on the restoration of the citadel of Aleppo. But we were given a choice. We could have worked anywhere in Syria, and the obvious choice was, okay, let's go to Salamiyya and work there. And Shah Karim's vision was beyond the Ismaili community. AKF was already there, food was going in, the council was there working. So Salamiyya would be okay. And he said, we have to rebuild Syria. What is the economic heart of Syria? And it's always been Aleppo. Aleppo's been thriving for 5,000 years, and the core of that, the heartbeat of that, is the souks. This is where people meet, where people trade, where people come to learn, because attached to the souks are madrasas and khans and coffee houses, some of the oldest in the world. And so the idea is if you could do section by section and restore this souk, you would bring shopkeepers back. Shopkeepers who had left, who have lost their livelihood, their means of supporting their family. And we have proved so far, we've restored 5 key sections of the souk and almost 300 shops, and we're continuing. We have another 5-year, so we completed a 5-year program, and our board has approved another 5-year program. And so we're going to continue to be in the souk and hopefully restore, the major portions of it over those next 5 years. But the sense of purpose was to drive the economy, not only of Aleppo, but of the whole country. Because as trade comes in, and this is from neighboring countries, from Lebanon, from Turkey, from the Kurdish areas, it brings people together. And I think money is the great unifier here. It really is. Where there's trade involved, and you can see it here in Dubai, you need stability. You need stability to be able to sell your products, bring your products in. And I think the souk project is more than just a restoration project. It's an economic engine for the city and for the country.
I have to challenge your exclusively capitalist view on this architectural structure. Because again, when you think about it, the purpose of this place is to trade, yes. But over its 1,000 years of history, of course, it is also a place for social encounter, for social cohesion, for learning, for relaxation, and even for diplomacy, because I understand that the souk at a later stage also had diplomatic representation in its structure. But beyond that also, every single individual that works there over the 1,000 years has had a purpose. And when we think nowadays, again, how much soul searching is going on about what is our purpose. This is a wonderful example of how a place that has been so battered over 1,000 years, periodically, not only recently, but over centuries, has picked itself up on the back of its people, first and foremost, and has continued with the determination to keep this place going, not only for livelihood, but also for the retention of local cultural identity and cohesion. And I remember somebody who was working there, he said, when the souk was destroyed, it ripped out the soul from my heart. We used to do our work, and then we used together with our friends to sit and drink coffee and play backgammon. So it's very, very much also a social place where you reaffirm belonging and community again. And I'm sure you also have several places and examples where that happens to this day.
We do, and in fact, one of the things that I was thinking about when we first were trying to figure out what the session should look like was, if you're speaking about elements of purpose, it's impossible to think about a community's purpose without thinking about the purpose or the role of the Imam in the Ismaili community. And I always go back to the Tut Singh speech where he received the Tolerance Award, where he very clearly articulates his role. And he does this in loads of other places, of course, but I like that particular speech the most. And he says very clearly that the Ismaili Imam's role is twofold. The first is to interpret the faith, and the second is to do everything in his power to improve the safety, security, and quality of their lives. And I think you see that in all of the projects that we do. And in the specific example of the Ismaili heritage sites that we look at, we often think that Ismaili heritage sites, are limited to possibly Jamaat Khanas or Ismaili centers. And there's so much more going on within them, not just in the present time, but historically as well. And I think, again, one of the things we have available at the stand is to see the kinds of peace-building and diplomatic sites that we have available. And this, ranges from, things like the 48th Ismaili Imam, Sultan Muhammad Shah's, address as President of the League of Nations at the Palace of Nations in Geneva. And then how you see that sort of develop into things like the delegation of the Ismaili Imamate, which is in Ottawa. And then the Global Center for Pluralism as well. And again, all of these things help to support the notion of the Imamate's responsibility, not only, and he says in the Tut Singh speech, this is not just for Ismailis, this is for the concerned communities. And I think that's really important. It speaks to something I think, Farooq, you spoke about earlier this afternoon. There you are. I was looking, I thought you were there. You were talking about some of this stuff a little bit earlier as well. And again, you find almost a culmination of that in the institutionalization of the imamate spatially, with the establishment of the Diwan of the Ismaili Imamate, as part of an agreement with the Republic of Portugal. And I think, again, when you talk about purpose and the ways in which this purpose gets manifested across all of the different stuff that you see in the pavilion, it becomes really powerful because it's about more than what we think it is, so much more. And that means that when we connect with each other, there's a way for us to find our niche and contribute in the ways that we know best and with which I think we flourish the best.
Yes, and I may actually add the museum to that in this respect, because, you know, there is still sometimes a little bit of eyebrow wrinkling around the fact that in the portfolio of architectural manifestations of His Highness's vision is this museum in Canada. But when you think about the purpose of that museum, in many ways it is actually absolutely integral to everything that we have talked about. Because not only is it, of course, a place to preserve and celebrate and build on heritage of Muslims and non-Muslims in dialogue, but it is also very much an ambassadorial presence and a cultural diplomacy presence in Canada, because it was explicitly given to Canada in recognition of its pluralistic aspirations in the nation itself and in the world. At the same time, it is also absolutely a community platform where we work very hard to make everyone welcome and to empower these encounters, these experiences, and then also the learning that happens when people come together. And in this day and age, again, it is a very, very crucial role, given that we are so fractured, we are so divided, and many people are so scared to talk to each other beyond differences and across cultures. So purpose is what we do and what His Highness has always had at the forefront of his mind, and that goes for the purpose-built structures he has given, and the purpose of the people who work there, and the purpose that people come to these buildings for their own well-being and progress and thriving in so many ways. Now, within all this, of course, identity also plays a very fundamental role. And identity is one of those things where we sometimes get stuck very much because we look at it often in very one-dimensional ways. You know, we are either Ismailis, or we are Shia Muslims, or we are Canadians, or we are Germans. So we tend to trade in one-dimensional labels when we talk about identity. But when, again, we look at the reality of our next case study, we will realize that actually all of us individually are a kaleidoscope of identities and can use that kaleidoscope to build bridges and to connect within the community intergenerationally, geographically, but then also beyond the community into the world at large. Start us off, Shiraz.
I will. I want to jump back to identity before jumping into the site museum in Delhi. My children are born in Switzerland. They live in France. They don't feel Swiss, but they certainly do feel French. Their mother is Belgian Catholic. They have some sense of having some Indian in their DNA based on the food I cook sometimes or the music I listen to. But it's at a fairly superficial level. They don't feel Belgian, sorry. But their sense of community is with their friends in school. Sometimes it's with the Ismaili community. When you're here, I'm still convinced on identity that it's constantly shifting. You're adding, but it's also constantly shifting. Here you're either on Team Canada, that's your national identity here, and then you're a member perhaps of the Syrian Ismaili community, so then you have another level. And then you're part of the Ismaili community as a whole, and then you have the larger Ummah. And for a long time, at least for me growing up, and certainly for some of you when we were growing up, wherever it was during the various fighting and incidents, we were Ismailis, we weren't Muslims. That was something we wanted to stay away from. Now, I don't know if that's changing or not in our community. I mean, if you ask the youngsters in our community, do you feel part of the Ummah. I don't know what answer you would get, but you would, maybe some of you can pipe in after this session. Going back to this, and sorry, I'm digressing, but going back to this project was really interesting. It was 10 years on the drawing board, and the idea was to connect a city park that we had built with a mausoleum tomb site that we had restored. And Shah Karim at the time was very adamant because we were really looking at this technically, architecturally. What can we put in to talk about the architecture of Humayun's tomb? And we had worked a little bit thinking about this, and it came down to, we had a meeting, we presented the ideas to Shah Karim, and I don't know if some of you, if you're aware, when Hazarmam was not convinced of something, but he wanted to be polite, he would first do this, look like this, turn his thumbs and goes. And that was the signal to ask him, Khudavan, what do you want? What would you like to see? And then he would say, well, if you don't mind, or I don't want to be too pushy. And then he would say, you need to talk about pluralism here. You need to talk about the Mughals and what they brought to India and and the lessons that their time in India can teach us in the present. And I think he had a foresight about the politics we were going to get into. This museum has thrived right now in a climate that is not conducive to it thriving and existing. But people are coming because we tell multiple stories about multiple identities, not just Muslim stories, Hindu stories, Jain stories, other types of stories here that aren't relegated to a proper identity, but really a mixture of identities that happened during the 700 years of Hindustani culture in this area, including music, including food, literature.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have that museum and that site if it was not for the fact that it was created for an individual. The Emperor Humayun, a single, one-off, unique man of his time, and the son of a founder of a dynasty, an intellectual, a philosopher, a poet, a husband of numerous wives, which I understand are not only Muslim, but came from different backgrounds, a doting father, and then an emperor, with all the expectations that come with it. And the sources speak about him as a wonderful human being, very kind, very just, very peaceful, interested in reading. In fact, the poor man died falling down the stairs with a pile of books on his arms coming from the library. So an intellect, and at the same time having to rule this expanding empire. And as a public figure, the judges are out on him because many criticize him for not having been a strong leader, a decisive leader, because he was so nice. But what we are trying to say here is that this individual man had many different identities. He was not only an emperor, and when it came to building a tomb for him, in a sense, everything he stood for as an individual and as a public figure, and as an aesthete and intellectual of his time, are encapsulated in the architectural structure you see today, which was in fact commissioned by his favorite wife in his memory, correct? Can you talk a little bit about all these different elements of pluralism that are encapsulated in the design and the interior design of the tomb itself?
Well, I can talk a little bit about the craft, the design. This is the precursor to the Taj Mahal, so this was the major influence. But what Humayun did was bring thinkers, craftspeople, designers from all over the Muslim world. It wasn't just localized to the area. He found the best people from wherever he could to work on this building. Unfortunately, when we restored the building, those crafts had died. We had to bring craftsmen from Uzbekistan to reteach the Indian craftsmen how to do tile again. I feel uncomfortable really talking about your particular question, Ulrike, because I know it on anecdote only, not through research. So I might not be telling you the complete truth.
Yeah. Well, at the highest level, though, it's definitely known that it incorporates earlier Central Asian traditions,
Absolutely.
Hindu traditions, even Western traditions coming in a little bit, right, with the inlay that's sort of seeping in.
The Chhatris you see are very much the Hindu tradition. The Central Asian Iran tradition is very much evident in the portals and the Ivans and the niches. The podium, I think, is a fairly relatively new innovation there. And so this building was ahead of its time in many ways.
Yeah. So within your portfolio, you must also have, you already mentioned the tree associated with a particular imam, but you must have a lot of places that also speak of the identity, the complex identity, multifaceted identity of an individual and the dynamics between all these different facets.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the stuff that you are talking about, Shiraz, in terms of, you know, I mean, it resonated quite deeply, both personally, and I think it's been our experience as well. So in the case, as you all not just know, but actually live every day. You know, we all come from, you know, the Ismailis come from at least 4 different traditions, right? You have the Arab, the Persian, the Central Asian, and the South Asian. And then you have the diasporic communities that come from that, and then the kinds of hybridities that we all are familiar with. All of us are married to other kinds of people who look different than ourselves, and therefore our kids have, you know, certain kinds of experiences around those. And I think, again, what really strikes me is, again, this layering that you were mentioning, the multiplicity of identities that we have. And we too often get stuck in thinking that we need to have just one. And I think what we need to do is slightly let go and be comfortable with the fact that we can be different things, and we are different things. You mentioned, you know, that we are not just the emperor, but of course all of us are teachers, parents, siblings, all sorts of things. You know, we are professionals, we are sportsmen and women, and I think this is reflected in the kinds of sites that we see. And a very big example for me for the identity element is really the Ismaili centers. And again, as you all know, we have 7 now, as part of a network of Ismaili centers around the world, each one in its own way representing, you know, the aspirations of the community, their presence in the community, their confidence in those places that they are stable, safe, secure, that these are places that we call home, that are established for us and provide us comfort, that these are stable, safe, secure, etc., and for us to flourish. And I think in the Ismaili Center, certainly, we see that although they are part of one Jamaat, in a sense, they very much reflect the local flavor, the local architecture, the kinds of things that they do. And so you go from, you know, relatively small footprint of the first Ismaili Center in London to the rather monumental footprint of the one in Dushanbe, or the one that's about to come up in Houston. And I think, again, we need to figure out ways of being comfortable with traversing all of these different spaces. And if we don't inhabit them, we will be forced to inhabit spaces that other people define for us. And I think what's really interesting in all of the work that we do is that we are constantly trying to push the boundaries of the spaces we can occupy, and that we can occupy with comfort, with confidence, with hope. And I think these are the elements of identity we really need to take on board a lot more than we do, and then let go of the kind of discomfort, because that's our own insecurity, frankly. It's not an insecurity or an unconfidence that certainly the imamate has for us. And I think in the visible manifestations of all of the work that you see over here, and especially even in the work that we do at the IS, there are enormous numbers of examples for us to occupy these spaces. It's just for us to actually fill those and be comfortable in filling them.
You bring up a really good point on the localization of these centers. The Toronto one, for instance, is very interesting. For those of you who have never been, it's worth visiting. The prayer space is circular. Now, this has a reflection on indigenous peoples who had lived in Canada for centuries before anyone else came. But those spaces, the sacred spaces and worship spaces, in many instances were circular. The design pattern that goes around that drum is maple, Canadian maple, chosen particularly for its rootedness in that culture. Then the pattern that it establishes as you look around it is like a zikr that goes all the way around, and that drum is beating. So it carries a lot of sense of meaning beyond just, oh, this is where we pray as Muslims, and it's tied to local culture, local thinking, heritage that goes back, not related to the Ismaili community.
Yes, and I would say there's beauty in complexity. It does take courage, as you say, but when you are stuck in boxes in terms of definitions, you are literally stuck. But if you realize that there are so many gray zones around the boxes, you realize it's the gray zones where the potential lies. And I would love to complete our conversation here today by asking the two of you, and I'll answer at the end as well. So when you contemplate, for you personally and also in your professional roles within the network and within the Jamaat, the topics of community and purpose and identity, how do you see them for yourself? Fayaz.
That's a really difficult one. I think, so I'll go to something that I've experienced over the course of the last, I think, week now that I've been here. And I think it's this idea of who we are, what we do, why we do it, how we do it as well is really important. And one of the things that's really struck me, aside from the energy of coming to a global encounter with so many different people, is the spirit of sheer giving that has, that completely permeates the air. From people who have donated enormous amounts of time to people who have donated funds to make sure that this event happens, the kinds of time and knowledge and experience that literally thousands of people have put into it, I think really energizes me. And when I think in the terms, personally, as you asked, in the kinds of things that I do, that provides me the inspiration. That if people can be so giving, so all the time in that way, the little bit that I can contribute to the bigger thing that energizes all of the ways in which we choose to work, because it's always a choice. I think that for me is my driving sort of motivation, and for me personally, that's the spirit. The idea of giving so fully, so unconditionally, to just make things better for somebody else. I think that's really powerful for me. That's come across really, really strongly for me this time.
Shiraz?
When, before my first child was born, my wife and I had a talk about how we would raise our daughter. And one of the things that was really important to me. And I told my wife this, and she understood it right away. I said to her, you know, I'm less concerned about what my child would believe, but how she's supported and taken care of. And I told my wife, wherever she goes in this world, if she needs help, if she needs support, if she's going through something tough, if whatever she needs, if there's an Ismaili there, no matter who that person is, whether they know her, they don't know her, she's a member of that community, she will be taken care of. And right away to have that global support system was such a powerful, I wouldn't say an argument, because we weren't arguing, we were just discussing. But that's why my daughter and my son go to Jamakhana. It's that sense that no matter where they go, they will be accepted and they will be supported. And that lesson has been amplified here.
Yes. I mean, for me, being the cuckoo in the nest here, I nevertheless would say that the sense of community I feel when I'm with all of you makes me really feel I belong. And for me personally, given the fact that I'm an absolute in-betweener, I don't actually belong anywhere, so I belong everywhere. And you shared your personal story, so for me, imagine, I'm German, born in Germany, I'm Lutheran Protestant, my parents' choice, not mine. And I married an Iraqi Mendaean religion that nobody has ever heard of, the most ancient Gnostic religion in the world. We met in Canterbury, UK, we got married, we moved to Scotland, to Edinburgh. We had 3 Scottish Iraqi kids. And we lived there, and then I came here to the region. I lived and worked here for 10 years. Now I'm in Canada. We are in Canada. We have a family that shuttles all the way. My son wears kilt on official occasions. My little one is here in Dubai and wears abaya on occasions. So I'm probably really one of the classical in-betweeners. And when I think about where my community is beyond you all, who I work with and who I've dedicated my life to in so many ways, I would say it's just where I am. My community is wherever I am at any one point in time. And my purpose really is to give. I always, with everything I do in my professional life and in my personal life, is just to give and make a difference. And perhaps make it a little bit better so that when I pass on, I leave something behind that gives hope and, makes it better. And in terms of my identity, you know what? Identity, I said it. I coined this thing about kaleidoscope of identities. But none of these aspects, none of these facets in themselves are static. Because every single day of our life, every moment of our lives, we actually navigate and mitigate these various facets of our identities. So, give you my example, if I run into an Arab colleague here from the olden days and I start speaking Arabic and I start my Arab body language, whatever, in that moment I'm sort of a wee German Arab, right? But if I go to see my sister in a little village in Germany in 2 weeks' time, I will be full-on German. You will see a totally different Ulrike. And in terms of my profession as well, you know, one day I'm the CEO and director and that comes with a certain persona. Another day I'm at the grassroots and I'm teaching kids in, online in East Africa. And that is actually where the beauty lies. We have so much potential in ourselves if we just allow ourselves the freedom to think beyond the box. And on that note, I want to leave you with a little quote from one of our school initiatives in the museum, which I think sums it all up so beautiful for all of us. It was an art exhibition that students did inspired by our collection and our mandate. And one girl had written about her artwork, "I am a mosaic of everyone I have ever loved." And with that, I thank my beautiful colleagues, Shiraz Allibhai, Fayaz Alibhai, and all of you for sharing our slightly off-the-wall conversation this afternoon. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.